Hello, this is part four. Um, when I was getting ready to teach, one of the things that I learned was uh, lesson planning. I learned a kind of lesson planning that was modeled on a Japanese style of lesson planning. And it was a very detailed and meticulous form of lesson planning. But one, one small aspect of that planning was to plan. So, for example, if a class was 1 hour long and I wanted to do a couple of activities, some lectures, give students some time to think about things, take questions, and so on and so forth, the lesson plan, the very left column of my lesson plan was to denote the times. So I might say from 0 to 5 minutes, I'll introduce the topic. From 5 minutes to 10 minutes, I'll allow students to think, or I'll introduce an exercise. From 10 minutes to 20 minutes, students will work on uh, the exercise, and from 20 minutes, and so on and so forth. And the whole hour would be mapped out according to time. And later on, when I began training future teachers, so when I became a professor, I occasionally taught these classes where it was more of an internship, where undergraduates would teach some remedial level mathematics classes. And so what we did was we planned our lessons together. And again, when we planned the lessons, I had them specify the time frame within a lesson. Now, the idea wasn't to be rigid to the plan, or wasn't to rigidly adhere to the time plan. So, for example, if a student in planning allotted, 15 minutes to a lecture, it wasn't that when they got to the 14-minute mark and they were only halfway through that they had to sort of speed through the second half in a minute to stick with the time. That wasn't the idea. They were still, or I suggested that they stay faithful to the spirit of the lesson. So if they felt that they needed to talk an extra 10 minutes past the time they allotted, the idea was to just go past the time. But when they would ask me why are we then planning the time so carefully, down to sometimes we would say for 3 minutes we would do this, for 7 minutes we would do this, and so on. And what I told them is what I learned in the process myself in planning, which is that in setting a time, let's say that I was going to give a lecture for 7 minutes. Now, so I would, in my lesson plan, I would write 7 minutes for introduction of this topic, lecturing on these ideas, and doing 3 examples. But if in reality the whole thing takes 15 minutes, I would be able to observe that. In other words, setting the time in the lesson plan was like the formation of a hypothesis, and the actual what happened was the sort of the running of the experiment. And when there's a divergence or great distinction between the hypothesis and the actual running of the experiment, what I get to observe very jarringly is that my ability to form the hypothesis in terms of how long I believe something will take is really off, and I get to experience how off it is. And that's different from if I never put any times in the lesson. If I just make a lesson plan that's loose and says, I'm just going to do this, and do that, sure, I'll have a similar lesson plan, and it'll have the same flow, but I won't have this jarring experience of saying, oh, I thought this would take exactly 7 minutes, and instead it took 15 minutes, or it took 30 minutes. And to create that jarring effect or experience was one of the main points of why I suggested that these interns also practice setting a time. And so the idea was, when we put the time into the lesson plan, the idea was that we're trying to anticipate and predict how long we think some activity is going to take. Now, most teachers will tell you, and I imagine most workshop facilitators, most lecturers, anyone who's giving a presentation will tell you that things always end up taking longer than we think. The general bias for most people is that we tend to underestimate how long something will take. So it's really wonderful to be able to see that again and again and again in actual experience, that Oh, I'm thinking this can take 7 minutes, it takes 30 minutes. I'm thinking this takes 1 minute, it takes 5 minutes, and so on. The more we experience that discrepancy, the more we begin to adjust our expectations, the more that we can learn from these experiences. And pretty soon we're able to hit the mark. We're able to say, even though instinctively I think this will take 3 minutes, from experience I now know that it takes 10 minutes. So I'm going to allot 10 minutes. And sure enough, it takes 10 minutes. And that was the key idea. So going back to the list that I suggested in part 3, making a to-do list, suppose you do the to-do list for 7 days in a row, stick it in a drawer, forget about it for 2-3 weeks, and then you look at your to-do list. Maybe there are 2 or 3 items that you still have not accomplished on that to-do list, but they've already passed. In other words, maybe it was you had to, you were going to watch an important television show, or you were going to study how to make certain kinds of books on Amazon, or how to self-publish, whatever it may be. You had set these tasks for yourself, and now 3 weeks later, not only have you not done them, but you recognize that they actually aren't that important to you, and that you have no intention of ever doing them. Now, if that shows up on your lists, that could be a wonderful thing to see, to experience. Very similarly to anticipating a time in a lesson plan, like this will take 7 minutes, and seeing that it takes 30 minutes. Likewise, we set a to-do list, and we write down all the things that we think are important to accomplish. And then a month later, when we look at our various lists, we notice that there's 2-3 items that are of no importance, that we somehow made important a month ago, but we realize after a month that they were of no consequence whatsoever. We didn't even address them, and we never took them up, we never completed them, and that's of no consequence to us. I would say that that's a great experience to have, because we can then learn to calibrate. Now, imagine you did that, and then, so that's the first month. Next month you do the same thing. Like you make a to-do list for a week, you put it in a drawer for about 3 weeks, you look at them, and again there's 2 or 3 items that you don't accomplish, you don't complete, and they're of no consequence. If that's your story, I would say that that's a wonderful thing, because you're getting feedback from your experience that your tendency to anticipate what's important to you is off. And if you can have that experience and you can see that, it can change the way you then plan. Just like if I can learn that that most people's tendency, including my own, is to underestimate how long something will take, I can gradually adjust my expectations or anticipation for how long something will take, so that what I intend and what I plan matches how long it actually takes. And when you get good at that, there's no discrepancy between what you expect and what happens. And there's no rush to make the lesson fit into the specified amount of time. But the same principle can apply in to-do lists. If we can see that our tendency is to put things on our to-do list that ultimately are of no consequence whatsoever, we can begin to develop a feel, an intuitive feel for which of the items we put on our to-do list ultimately will be of little to no consequence. And that happens through looking at our experience, or through, the saying is hindsight is 20/20. We use that, we leverage that principle to our advantage. We use hindsight to look back at our original to-do lists and realize, some of these things are of no consequence. And if we can experience this a number of times, we can begin to hone in on what are the qualities of these things that we become convinced in the moment are so important to accomplish, and there's a sense of urgency, but in fact, in the long run, they don't matter. And so I would say that the exercise of doing to-do list, leaving it alone for a while, and then just looking at it, just observing, can be useful in that way. Now, that isn't so much about procrastination, but it is about bringing together person A and person B from part 1. The planner or the intender of our tasks and the person who's going to do it. Because this person A, as I described in part A, who says, there are certain tasks that I need to get done, If that person is off and is constantly conjuring tasks that turn out to be of no consequence, then person A isn't contributing as well as that person could to the whole endeavor of living. Yeah? So if person A, the person who's intending and creating to-do lists, is making 99 items on a list of 100 items in the course of a month, and 99 are of no consequence, that's good to know. It's good for us to know that, yeah, person A is pretty unreliable, and person A can adjust to where pretty soon maybe 10 out of 10 things that are put on a to-do list are of consequence to us, even a month later, even 6 months later. So I'll stop there, and I'll leave you with that. Thank you for watching.